What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Drites Bro Sports Channel. Ethan here. We are doing another NFL week reaction and review. Week 8. I believe this is week 8. I'm 99% sure this is week 8. Yes, week 8. A lot of crazy games. Definitely, I would say not like a boring week of football. It's a pretty dang good week of football. Looking forward to getting into the reaction here. Before we do, though, please, guys, if you enjoy the content at all, find me on YouTube. Please help me out and help me grow by liking the videos. I mean, if you like them, like the videos, and feel free to subscribe to the channel. We're going to be doing this for the rest of the season. We're going to start also probably getting into Avs, Nuggets, NBA, NHL stuff as the football season continues to go on. Eventually, we'll get to that stuff as I am a Colorado sports fan. We also talk about other stuff, like, for example, in this video, we're going to talk about all the NFL teams. So, if you like sports, hit that subscribe button. For this video, if you guys want to see or have fantasy football questions or start-sit questions for Week 9 in fantasy, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll get back to you very quickly for the most part on those. I like talking fantasy football with you guys for sure. So, let's get into it. First game we're talking about in Week 8, in the Week 8 slate, Thursday Night Football, Vikings against the Rams here. Fun game. Definitely a good one. We saw Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp be back in this game. Puka Nacua being a last-second active player. Ended up being crazy because we saw a lot of production from that receiving core. Matthew Stafford's a baller, guys. I mean, he's always been great. When you give him his weapons, he is going to put on a show, and that's what we saw in this one. Rams end up winning by 10 against a very solid Vikings defense. You know, Thursday night football games are always weird, but Vikings definitely well coached. We talked about it a lot in the past reactions and the past weekly reviews. Vikings have a sturdy, reliable defense for the most part, and the Rams move the ball at ease. Matthew Stafford has one of his best games of the season, and they dominate in a way. Not dominate like blow out the Vikings, but they have a great dominating offensive performance in this game, and like we said already, against a good defense. Matthew Stafford carries them with 4 touchdowns. I've already mentioned the receivers. The receivers both have giant impacts. Puka has over 100 yards. Cooper Kupp gets a touchdown. We even see Demarcus Robinson get into the end zone twice. Kind of fluky, fantasy-wise, fluky. Can't expect that all the time. Kyren Williams scores his weekly touchdown this game in the passing game instead of the run game, but still has a good game on the ground. Dominant performance by the Rams. Maybe this will turn their season around. We were talking and hearing things about Cooper Kupp getting traded heading into this Thursday night matchup. Well, now that they just beat one of the best teams in the NFL on Thursday Night Football, I doubt they're wanting to trade any of their guys. I never really bought into it anyways. I was hearing stuff about the Broncos, my team, trading for Cooper Kupp. I was like, never bought into that. I never understood how the Broncos would end up getting Cooper Kupp, even if the Rams were wanting to trade him, let alone how in the world the Rams would be willing to give up Cooper Kupp and that Matthew Stafford connection. I think Cooper Kupp should retire with Matthew Stafford. So that's what I would assume is going to happen here. They're going to stay together after this big win. Definitely dug themselves a little bit of a hole, though, the Rams did to start the season. So they need to be getting out of that hole and winning games here. Now that they're healthy, hopefully they stay healthy, and hopefully they can rattle off some wins. Big-time win against a good opponent, though. This shows me some life in that team and gives me some confidence in them, their ability to finish out the season and maybe get into the playoffs. Overall, fantasy-wise, Kyren Williams is a dog. Cooper Kupp and Puka are both dogs. They are going to probably diminish each other's value a little bit because when we saw at the beginning of the year, Puka went out, Cooper Kupp was going crazy, and then we got Cooper Kupp injury, and then it's just been ugly since. This game, Puka looked like he was the one that was eating, and then Cooper Kupp kind of saved his fantasy performance with a touchdown. Just expect that to happen. I think what we're going to see is like one game one will be good, one game another will be good. There's going to be some games where they both are good, but you're not going to see a lot of performances when they both do great. And I think if I had to choose one, now that Puka's back and the way he looked in the game, I would choose Puka. I think he looked more fresh, more spry, and going into the season, we all assumed he was going to be the one. I think it's possible the way he looked in this game coming back. So we'll see how it plays out. I think they're both great still. So both very good plays in fantasy. And we talked about Kyron already. He's a dog. Let's move on to the Vikings here. Vikings played well as well. I mean, it was a good game. Sam Darnold has 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. Not a bad stat line whatsoever. Aaron Jones doesn't get it going in this one. I think that's a big reason why they lost. They just couldn't run the ball. Justin Jefferson has a great game, unable to get into the end zone, though. However, you see Josh Oliver and Sherfield. I believe those are tight ends and maybe like a back-of-the-line receiver gets in the end zone as well. No turnovers. I mean, I just think I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I didn't see this full game on Thursday night. I think I was busy making my last week's video during half of this game and like doing some other things, so I didn't watch the entire game. From what I saw, though, I think the Vikings just played like they played a Thursday night game, coming off of a very emotional, hard-fought game where they just lost to the Lions. So that's what I think. It was almost like a letdown game. Like they're coming off a huge game against the Lions, which was like one of the best games of the year, and then they play Thursday night, and they're facing like a team that's gotten healthy and is solid, and they just kind of let down. Their defense let down big time, giving up 30 points. They're playing a team that just got healthy, so there's some excuses built in there. I would not overreact if I'm a Vikings fan. I have talked about their coaching staff throughout the last several weeks. I think their coaching staff is incredible. I think they're doing a great job. You don't even see anything like super negative in the score or in the box score in this game for them. I mean, Sam Darnold, he has a fine game. If the defense shows up, he probably easily carries them to a win. The running game in this one wasn't there. I don't know, to be honest, if that was more credited to the Rams or just the lack of blocking for the Vikings. Maybe it was the game script. Like I said, this reaction here is probably, admittedly so, one of my, I just didn't watch the entire game. So, box score, nothing bad. It's just I think the defense didn't show up, and I think it was just a little bit of a letdown game coming off a game against the Lions for the Vikings. So, I look for them to bounce back. Definitely in the division they're in, they're going to have some very hard matchups towards the second half of the season. They're going to need at least 4 or 5 more wins, probably, to get into the playoffs. So we'll see if they can bounce back and keep it going. 2 losses in a row, not exciting if you're a Vikings fan. I do think they were 2 hard-fought losses, and they still look good as a team. They just need to run into a couple wins here and get back on track. So not overreacting as a Vikings fan. Fantasy-wise, Aaron Jones has a horrible game. He's the only other running back in this game that saw touches, so you love him in fantasy if he's healthy. And Justin Jefferson's a dog. You don't love Jordan Addison right now or Naylor. If their passing volume's not going to be there, it's just going to be the Justin Jefferson show for the most part. Jordan Addison's rosterable, maybe with some bye weeks coming up. You can play him as your flex in some leagues, but not an exciting play unless it's a great matchup, which this game should have been a good matchup, and he still put up a dud. Sam Darnold's still playing well, though. You technically can play him also in certain leagues for fantasy, so if he's healthy. Let's move on. Spent a little while on that game, it felt like, and that's the game, like the one game I probably know the least amount about as far as me like actually watching the game and paying attention to most of the game. So let's move on here. Eagles, Bengals. This was an interesting game too because the Bengals are such a wild card, as we've talked about a little bit through the season. And then you have this Eagles team who can also be a wild card, but we know when they're playing good, they're like one of the best teams in the NFL. And we kind of saw that here. Eagles easily beat the Bengals, and it just comes down to this game. The Eagles were offensively precise. They were conditioned. They stuck to the game plan. And the Bengals are just not good enough of a team to be able to handle that. The Eagles also have a competent defense, so the Bengals weren't able to just like do whatever they wanted, and we see an easy win for the Eagles here. I think this says a lot about the Eagles. They just needed to find some consistency, and now that they have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith back, they found some consistency in this game. They were able to run the ball. They stuck to the run game, and even though Saquon had a little bit of a down game, they stuck with it, and later in the game, he was able to pop off some runs against a skeptical Bengals defense. We saw the Bengals DBs get burnt by both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith multiple times in this game. Devontae Smith catching a long touchdown pass. Jalen Hurts only has one throwing touchdown, which came from Devontae Smith. However, he ended up getting to the goal line 3 different times and QB sneaking it, tush pushing it into the end zone 3 different times, and he had a great game. 16 of 20 completions and attempts. That's a fantastic game from Jalen Hurts. They, like I said, they stuck to the run. The Bengals defense just had no chance against this Eagles offense the way they were moving the ball in this game. So shout out to the the Eagles in this one. Great win. A game they probably just needed to win based off of how the Bengals have played and their record. Fantasy-wise, Jalen Hurts, if he's going to continue to get rushing touchdowns every game, he's going to go off, which he did in this one. And he's just very reliable. Saquon Barkley's a dog. Didn't score a touchdown in this game, but, man, he came close multiple times, and he still had over 100 yards rushing. Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown come back. They both have good games. This was a down week, I guess, for A.J. Brown. He had a big game last week. I'm pretty sure I said this in last week's review. I literally was like, I'm pretty sure I mentioned, like, next week Devontae Smith's going to go off against the Bengals. And he did in this one. He catches a crazy long touchdown. Really nice play. A.J. Brown still has a good game, just didn't get in the end zone. So it was somewhat mediocre for his standards. All those guys super playable in fantasy. We're waiting for Goddard to get back into the lineup to see how he's going to do. He was doing great when there was injuries. We'll see if he comes back and sees targets again. For the Bengals, obviously tough matchup for them. Not a good game. Not an easy game for them to win here by any means, especially with how their defense is just not that good this year. And they got smoked. Ultimately, they just played a team that was sound offensively and just ended up smashing their defense, and their defense had no answers. On top of that, they played against the Eagles' defense, who is good enough and slowed down their offense enough to where it was an easy win. We still see Joe Burrow throw the ball around a little bit. Did throw a pick in this game, which is not what you want to see as a struggling team that doesn't have a good defense. You can't be turning the ball over. Chase Brown gets the most work in this offense, especially in the running game. He scores a touchdown in this one, which you're glad to see, but other than that, he looked horrible. The Philly defense, rush defense, sorry, I didn't know how I wanted to say that there, is very good. The Phillies' rush defense is very good. So you don't really expect running backs going up against their defense to do very well ever. He gets in the end zone and saves a fantasy day, I guess. We saw Mike Gesicki breakout game here. I almost guarantee you next week he's going to see no more than 3 receptions. That he's so inconsistent, it's insane. There's some games where the defense just lets him go crazy, and that was one of these games, which makes sense. It's like if I'm playing against the Bengals, I want Mike Gesicki to go crazy and no one else. So there's also games where he just never sees a target. So this is one of those games where he sees a lot of targets. He has a good fantasy game. Don't believe it's more of a fluke to me, in my opinion. Ja'Marr Chase has a great game. Although he doesn't see a lot of yards, he catches a touchdown and sees a lot of targets. And then we see, oh, you know what? I forgot. Higgins was ruled out in this game. So that actually definitely hurt the Bengals. That makes it a lot harder for them to be able to really do anything when all they have to do as a Philadelphia defense is hone in on Ja'Marr Chase. Then it's going to be hard for them to move the ball. So definitely hurts them that Higgins wasn't in. I don't even think if Higgins was in, they would have won, but maybe instead of it being a 20-point game, it was more of like a 10-point game if Higgins was in there. But fantasy-wise, if Higgins is playing, you want to start him for sure. Ja'Marr Chase, an easy start. Running back-wise, I don't want anyone besides – I don't even really want Chase Brown. It's somewhat split if you look at this box score. Zach Moss will get carries, but also he dominates the passing game. Chase Brown still gets 2 receptions in this game, so if I had to pick a guy, I definitely want Chase Brown because he gets the goal line carries, it seems like, at this point. They both are just going to diminish each other's value, which is super annoying. Definitely still viable and useful in fantasy. You just would rather have something else. Let's move on. Ravens-Browns. Wow. Okay, shocker of the weekend. Oh, what are the Ravens doing, man? How do you lose this game? Oh, well, as most of you already know, and I'll tell you right now, you lose this game because Jameis Winston effect. Let's talk about the Browns for a second. I'm not sure if this is like the Browns are back because of Jameis Winston or if it's a fluke game that the other team just wasn't prepared because they hadn't seen Jameis Winston play in a while. And they just got kind of caught off guard. I do think the Browns' offense is 10 times better with Jameis Winston. We've said that in previous videos. Deshaun Watson was like a plague not only to the team, but to the offense itself. He just isn't good anymore. And I just don't think a lot of the players on that team even liked Deshaun Watson the way they were playing when he was in there. And I think now that you got a guy that people can rally around in Jameis Winston, I think that whole team in itself can like put up some points now offensively and maybe be more competitive. My fear is that it's kind of like the new head coach or the like if a team like has a coach come in there and interim head coach, that's the thing I'm looking for. Interim head coach effect, and then all of a sudden they win the next week because like the team's rejuvenated and is rallying around their new coach, and then after that it kind of just comes back to earth. We very well may see that with the Browns here. However, like as I say that, let's get into the positives for the Browns. I mean, Jameis Winston's a real quarterback who can actually throw the ball. So you see guys like Cedric Tillman get a lot of love in this game, scoring 2 touchdowns. Jerry Jeudy has targets in this game. The running game was there against a Ravens defense who's definitely competent. I mean, I think what we talked about before, they got holes in that defense, but I mean, before this game, the Browns couldn't do anything offensively, and now all of a sudden they look fine. So, shout out to Jameis Winston. Shout out to Browns fans. This is a big win, although I think the season's too far gone. It's going to take a miracle, essentially a miracle, to get like into the playoffs in that division especially. But at least the team, you have something to root for now. You got Nick Chubb back, Jameis Winston. Viable fantasy players we'll get into really quick. I mean, I don't really want to start Jameis Winston in most leagues until we see more at least. However, if you're down bad, you can play him in deep leagues. Cedric Tillman's the receiver you want there. Obviously, Njoku's a great play now. Nick Chubb, you're kind of waiting to see if he can come back. I'm skeptical about it because of how bad his injury is. I think it'll be probably next year when he looks a little better. However, he's really the only running back there that they want to use still. So he's got value. Maybe he'll start getting a little better in the next few weeks. You still can play him in your flex. Most leagues, you're going to be able to play him, especially with bye weeks and stuff. So, in good matches, especially, you can play Nick Chubb. Otherwise, I'm not huge on like Elijah Moore or Jerry Jeudy. I don't keep them on the bench or on the waiver wire. Great win overall, though, for the Browns. Let's move on to the Ravens. Bad look for the Ravens. Like I said, there's some built-in excuses. You're playing a quarterback you haven't seen in years. Maybe you just got caught off guard. You can't be losing these games against struggling teams that are in your division, though. Especially for the Ravens, who are trying to really fight for like a top seed in the AFC. This is a horrible loss. Some built-in excuses, but man, like the defense just looked like they had holes. Like we've said before, they have holes in that defense that were exploited. Lamar Jackson in the offense just looked way too inconsistent. Derrick Henry even still, like they need to be running the ball more than 11 carries to Derrick Henry. I think that's ultimately why they kind of lost. I think they started to get away from the run game a little too much, even though Derrick Henry still sees a good fantasy output. Lamar Jackson has carries, but I think half of Lamar Jackson's carries were he goes back to pass and then has to scramble and run. So they just contained their offense, the Browns did. They contained the Ravens' offense good enough to where they were able to squeak out a win, and they're just disciplined enough. I think the big story here is the fact that they just were able to contain Lamar, which helped just contain the running game overall. The Ravens went away from the run too much and cost them. Zay Flowers has a great day receiving, but man, like you watching that offense, whenever you just hate to see them throw the ball more, like too much. I'm not even going to say more than they run it, but like you just hate to see them throw the ball too much because it's just so, you can just tell it's not Lamar's game. It needs to be so balanced and honestly running the ball more, and then when it is, it just opens things up, and then Lamar can make some plays in the passing game. But if you're like chasing games, for example, in the playoffs when they play the Chiefs and the Chiefs are making them chase games, they're just never going to win. Or very rarely going to win. Every now and then Lamar will pull a rabbit out of his hat, of course, but it's just not ideal, and it costs them in this game. You see Mark Andrews continue to play well, catching touchdowns in the red zone. We said that last week. Like, the guy that's going to be catching touchdowns in the red zone for the Ravens, if Lamar's not throwing it to a running back and they're rocking into the end zone, it's going to be Mark Andrews. You're going to see very few running back touchdowns here, or receiver touchdowns in this offense. It's tight ends and running backs. They did add Deontay Johnson. Just yesterday we got the news. I'm recording this right now on Wednesday. Heard it on Tuesday. We'll see how he fits in the offense. I ultimately think Deontay Johnson's just going to replace Rashad Bateman and be like an upgrade over Rashad Bateman. I don't think hardly anything else is going to change. You don't love it if you own Zay Flowers or Mark Andrews. However, I doubt anything's going to change for Mark Andrews. Things are going to stay the same. If he doesn't catch a touchdown, he's not going to do anything hardly. And then Zay Flowers will probably still be like the short yardage target guy, target hog that still gets the majority of the receptions. Maybe diminishes Zay Flowers' fantasy value a little bit. However, it could be exciting. I mean, it's just another weapon for an already plentiful, like, Ravens offense that has a lot of guys. So I think they need to continue to stick with the run for real life if they want to win games, and then their defense needs to kind of figure things out. They do play the Broncos next week, so it's very at home for the Ravens as well. So as a Broncos fan, I mean, the Broncos never can go on the East Coast and play well, especially against a good team like the Ravens. I would be shocked if the Broncos beat the Ravens. However, they put themselves in a position here losing to the Browns that it is going to be a very bad look if they lose to the Broncos at home this next weekend. So one more thing on the Ravens. Justin Tucker arguably lost them this game. Justin Tucker has been so annoying, and you could probably tell how I'm talking about it. It's like, it's just a kicker, dude. Come on. I have Justin Tucker stocks in fantasy. And it's like the 1 year I get you, man, in fantasy, like you decided to have the worst year of your career, dude. He no longer can kick a ball more than 50 yards accurately whatsoever. If he makes that 50-yard field goal in this game, all of a sudden they have a short-range field goal at the end of the game. Not short, but like a 40-yard field goal attempt at the end of the game to win. But he misses the field goal, and then he's just costing me in fantasy. It's just a giant mess. Justin Tucker is getting close to looking like he's washed. I will say, though, there's so many older kickers that like start having bad seasons and then their team has abandoned them, and then they find somewhere else and with a different team, and then they have like 3 more great years. So maybe that's something that could happen with Justin Tucker. They probably shouldn't get rid of Justin Tucker, but it's like, my God, dude. And then as a Ravens fan, I'd be pissed off at Justin Tucker as well for missing, because they could have won this game if he made the field goal. So I know it's 50 yards, but dude, like, you made your whole career with being able to make these long field goals. It's like, what is going on this year? Is it just because you're on my fantasy team that you're deciding to miss them now? I don't know. It's frustrating for me watching them. It's like I'm seeing all these kickers on red zone every weekend make field goal at long field goal after long field goal, and then Justin Tucker gets up for one and he's like always just missing it. It's ridiculous. Let's move on, though. Done talking about kickers, probably. This game, probably not a lot to talk about in this game. Titans get destroyed by the Lions. I will say at the beginning of this game, it was 14-14 at one point. Let's give the Lions their props. I mean, they just got done with a crazy tough game against Minnesota on the road, and then they come in and play the Titans, and then they start the game off like with a letdown-looking game, as we talked about with other games. 14-14, and all of a sudden the Lions are just like, wait a second, man, this team's bad and we're good. Let's just pour it on them. And that's what they did. Absolutely demolished the Titans. The Titans are still horrible. I mean, they had Rudolph in there. Mason Rudolph looked fine through the first quarter, and then things just like fell apart because it's Mason Rudolph and that team's just not good. The Lions score 52 points, and the Titans have like a decent defense. That's how like good the Lions are right now. It's a team that's easy to root for in the Lions. I hope they make the playoffs. They're gonna make the playoffs, but I hope that like I'd be down to see them in the Super Bowl and hopefully win the Super Bowl as long as it's not the Broncos, which I doubt it will be, right? So let's just go to fantasy here. I mean, it's a very simple game. For the Lions, you start most of their players. Jameson Williams still suspended for now. However, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs both have pretty good games in this one. They both find the end zone. Jahmyr Gibbs has a very good game. I will say Jahmyr Gibbs looks way more explosive than David Montgomery right now. However, they're never going to stop using David Montgomery as long as he's healthy because they want to keep both backs as fresh as possible. And David Montgomery is still a very viable back. He's going to continue to get red zone looks as well. So they're both viable. And the offense is good enough to where they're both very good plays, which is very rare in fantasy. Jared Goff doesn't have to do hardly anything in this game, but still throws for 3 touchdowns. Just shows how good the offense is. They pretty much didn't have to throw, and they still dominated easily. And Jared Goff still throws 3 touchdowns. I would say Jared Goff's ceiling is a little capped just because there's no rushing upside. But when you see an offense that's cooking like the Lions are, you can start him in fantasy, especially if you have to, like with bye weeks and stuff. He's a good start in most matchups. Receiving-wise, I mean, they got the tight ends involved in this game. A lot of tight end touchdowns on National Tight End Day on Sunday. So this was one of those games where tight ends got involved. A lot of it was because Jameson Williams was out, so I think they were just down to use their tight ends a lot more. And they did, and they looked good. Sam Laporta had a good game. Amon-Ra pretty much did nothing but falls into the end zone. They just didn't need to throw the ball, so Amon-Ra struggled. And when they did, it was just easy passes to tight ends, and they just took advantage of that. Otherwise, you start Amon-Ra, start Sam Laporta. No one else in the team's really that startable after that, unless Jameson Williams comes back. But even then, they might. Jameson Williams is like a boom-bust guy. So we kind of know the guys in this offense at this point. If you have questions, once again, leave them in the comments. Let's move on to the Titans. And I want to move on to the Titans, not for that long, but I just want to give them their props for being one of the worst teams in the NFL. As a Broncos fan, there's this weird thing that happens, is at least to me, when you are a fan of bad teams. It's not fun, obviously, when you're a fan of a bad team. However, when you start to get out of that and you can kind of start to make fun of other teams. Like the Broncos have been the teams that in the past years where everyone else in the league would make fun of how bad the Broncos are and just make fun of what they are. Now that the Broncos are having a solid start to the season and they look like they're trending up a little bit, now I'm looking at these teams like the Titans, and I can just make fun of them a little bit. They're just so bad. They have it's just like the Broncos. They have some small bright spots, like their rushing defense, usually, not in this game, usually is pretty good. Their defense overall is usually pretty good. But that's it. Otherwise, they don't have a lot of playmakers. They don't have a quarterback, and the Titans are just horrible right now. We say it every week almost. Shedeur Sanders sweepstakes, they are in it. They probably need him the most, and I think there's a tie to Shedeur Sanders in the Tennessee coaching staff, so I could see him going there for sure. I'd rather him go to the Titans than the Raiders, so we'll see what happens, but I'd be surprised if they win more than 2 more games. They're so bad, and I think teams just toy with them because they're so bad. DeAndre Hopkins gone to the Chiefs, which I think we talked about in the last video, but that proved that's the thing. I was talking about how DeAndre Hopkins to the Chiefs doesn't really affect Calvin Ridley that much, and I wouldn't be super high on Calvin Ridley. Well, he went off in this game, so I may have been wrong about that. He's the only guy they can throw to, so it makes sense that he's getting a lot of targets and production. that's how I would assume that's going to be how it is in most games. I mean, are they going to be winning that many games? They're going to have to throw in a lot of games, and he's the only guy there. I think if Mason Rudolph's the quarterback, he's viable. He's a good play now. If Will Levis gets back in there, nope, he's even worse. So I don't want to play. I'm not happy about Calvin Ridley if Will Levis is playing. If it's Mason Rudolph, at least he somewhat can throw the ball. And Calvin Ridley showed that he can produce in this game. Like I said, though, perfect game script for Calvin Ridley. Now, we can't really hate on him for that because most of the games they're going to have this year are going to be good game scripts for Calvin Ridley. We'll see if he can continue it. The path is there because they have no one else in the offense. Tony Pollard. Let's look at Tony Pollard's stats real quick. I mean, 20 attempts, 94 yards, and what was the worst game script of all time. Tony Pollard's startable too. You just don't like it because they're going to be in a lot of negative game scripts, but they realize that Tony Pollard's talented, so it's Calvin Ridley and Tony Pollard. So you're going to have to start them in fantasy, even though there's going to be some ugly weeks probably because they're such a bad team. Like I said, if Will Levis is in there, I don't want to play any of them. Moving on, shout out Lions, they're very good. Fun game here, Cardinals and Dolphins. I was making fun of the Cardinals last week in the Chargers game because I was just calling them mid over and over. Great win for the Cardinals. I mean, the Dolphins have been terrible this year, and they've been down bad, but Tua was back in this game, and they looked like they were competent on offense again, and Cardinals still pulled off a great win. So shout out to the Cardinals. It's a good win for them that gets them to 4-4, and now they're a respectable team in the NFC now. So don't think I have a ton to say about this game, besides that it was a good game, hard-fought, tight game, and the Cardinals were able to pull it off, which you love to see your team come in clutch when it matters. Kyler Murray had a great game. That's probably why they win. I mean, I think they lose when Kyler Murray plays badly, and then they win when Kyler plays good. Or at least the offense looks great when Kyler plays good. James Conner falls in the end zone, but he does not have a great rushing game. And then we see Trey McBride goes off. So Marvin Harrison has a bounce-back game, catches a touchdown, has a bunch of yards. Shout out to Marvin Harrison Jr., He's a rookie, so every now and then he'll be inconsistent, I think, but he's going to get the opportunities in the offense, and the offense is going to be having to throw the ball in a lot of games. So shout out to Marvin Harrison. He gets the touchdown on this one, and then Trey McBride goes off. Maybe it's not so much Kyler Murray. I mean, I think Kyler Murray is the obvious one. If your quarterback's not going to be good, your team's not going to be good. If your quarterback's going to be good, then your team's going to be good. So saying that, like I just said, is no, are you... I don't really know what I'm trying to say there. Everyone knows that. Maybe it's more like a Trey McBride thing for the Cardinals. If they could get Trey McBride going, I think it opens up a lot for their offense, is what we saw in this game with Marvin Harrison having a good game. I think they need to try to continue to get Trey McBride going. And good things happen for their offense. So, good game for the Cardinals. Don't have much else to say about that besides Trey McBride's an obvious start in fantasy. Marvin Harrison's an obvious start in fantasy. James Conner's an obvious start in fantasy. Kyler Murray is usually an obvious start in fantasy. And then you have some more fringe guys like Michael Wilson that I don't ever really want to start. Greg Dortch, never want to start those guys unless you're in a crazy deep league. And then Michael Wilson's viable. He'll catch a touchdown sometimes. He'll get some looks. Moving on to the Dolphins, though, exciting for them because Tua came back. However, by no means was an explosive game for the passing game in Miami. I think they just and the Cardinals' defense isn't very good. I just don't think the Dolphins are all that good. Now it's way better now that Tua's back, of course. But I think even before Tua was hurt, I think the Dolphins' offense just is gonna never look that good in the beginning, anyways. And maybe instead of being an elite offense like they were last year, now this year we can just realize and understand that they're mediocre. Like we were calling the Cardinals last week. They're just a mediocre mid-tier offense, and unless they have a pop-off game, they're not going to show you a lot unless we see maybe Tua get super locked in after coming back from his concussion. Maybe there's some rust, but he looked fine to me, and they just couldn't do a lot against a bad offense. So Tua doesn't throw any picks. He has one touchdown only, though. Not a ton of yards for Tua's standards. Devon Achane had a good game. They needed to give the ball to him more often. What happened here is Raheem Mostert got like a bunch of trash carries and then he stole the touchdowns, which I thought was going to happen going into the season. We'll see if they give Achane more looks in the red zone or if it's back to Mostert now that Mostert's healthy in this offense. But weird. I mean, you see Devon Achane average 9.7 yards a carry in this game. No touchdowns, though, so only 10 carries. Miami might be the most confusing offense to evaluate in all of NFL this year after like how good they were last year and now how mediocre they are this year, even though Devon Achane's still averaging the same amount of yards per carry. And they didn't really lose that many pieces. I don't get it. What this box score is telling me here is that they just need to give Devon Achane the ball more. However, when they've done that in the beginning of the season, they still didn't look good. So I don't really know how to fix the offense. I don't have any suggestions. The only thing I would say is hopefully now that Tua is back and he hopefully can shake the rust off more, these things start to click more. But my goodness, they just need, I don't know, I was going to say they maybe just need to run the ball more, but then again, they ran the ball a decent amount, like not around average, so weird for the Dolphins. I don't know what to do with them. The receivers just didn't have that good of a game. Maybe it was Tua's fault. I don't know. The only way I saw this game too was through red zone. So Tyreek Hill needs to get going more. Jalen Waddle needs to get going more. The receivers just all had such a mediocre day. Devon Achane went off in the receiving game as well. So I don't know what they need to do more. Good win for the Cardinals. Dolphins just need to start to click or they're about to be out of everything very quickly here. Fantasy-wise, we need to see more from Tua. This was a good matchup, and he just didn't produce very well. Maybe he was rusty. Devon Achane's an automatic start with this stat line. It was a good matchup for him, but automatic start. They're just going to continue to use him a lot. Raheem Mostert's going to vulture some goal line touchdowns and red zone touchdowns. Very annoying for Achane owners. I still don't think Mostert's going to be consistent enough to where you need to start him every week. Maybe if the matchup's good and you think this game's going to be high scoring, you can throw him in there to your fantasy lineup and he falls into the end zone like he did in this one. Down game for Hill and Waddle. We hope that's just because Tua's shaking off the rust. But, man, I mean, where we drafted Hill and Waddle in fantasy leagues, they need to start getting back into it now. This was another good matchup, and they just did not produce very well. We'll see what happens this next week. We need Tyreek Hill and Waddle to come back to form if you really are excited about this Dolphins offense again. Weird game, good game, weird matchup, good win for the Cardinals. Let's move on to one of the more funny games of the week here. Is this even an upset? It's kind of hard to call this one an upset when the Jets are just the Jets, right? Patriots pull off a 3-point win against the Jets with like a late touchdown, I believe it was, which is embarrassing. Like at least make it like they let them go and get a field goal. I'm pretty sure they drove and scored a touchdown late to win this game, which is so bad for the Jets. The Aaron Rodgers experiment, and I'm not a Jets fan, so everything here is just an outsider looking into this situation. The Aaron Rodgers experiment is a giant L. I think them firing their coaching staff and stuff, it has not helped anything. And I think it hasn't really helped anything because the problem wasn't necessarily the coaching staff. Now, by no means do I think the coaching staff was great. I think it probably was going to get the coaching staff and coach was going to get fired eventually anyways. I mean, you have Nathaniel Hackett there, which I can make comments on him. I don't think he's a good coach. I think he's an Aaron Rodgers yes man, which has gotten him opportunities. And I think that's what he's doing there. He's just Aaron Rodgers yes man, and Aaron Rodgers ultimately runs the offense. And now we see it continue not to work. So maybe the problem is Aaron Rodgers. And I think that's the experiment here has failed, and Aaron Rodgers is the problem. So they're 2-6. It's going to take almost a miracle for them to make a run at the playoffs. They're pretty much going to have to win out. And I don't see them doing that because I don't think their team's very good. They just lost to a horrible Patriots team that Drake May got hurt very early in the game, and they had to play Jacoby Brissett. And they lost. And they let them drive and score a game-winning touchdown. That's embarrassing. And I think it's over for the Jets here, and it's hilarious, and I'm actually happy the Patriots won just because of how Jets fans are. I think I was going along these lines last week in my last reaction. Now, there's a lot of good Jets fans out there. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I hate Jets fans. It's just funny, the New York media. And it's just funny to hear everything. Like, we always just have to hear about the Jets, and it's just funny what they lose, kind of like the Cowboys, right? So, let's talk fantasy a little bit here. I mean, ultimately, the game is what it is. It was funny because the Jets just blew it, and they should have easily been winning this game against a bad team. Well, they're a bad team too. So we see Aaron Rodgers. He doesn't throw a pick in this game, but he just has a very typical nowadays old man Aaron Rodgers game where he's just like completing like not a ton of passes. They're not throwing a ton of the time because like I don't think they can rely on him throwing a ton anymore. And he's fairly accurate still, so he's able to make some things happen, but it just isn't good enough in this one. They use Braylon Allen and Breece Hall almost as a split, and Braylon Allen gets the touchdown. Very ugly for Breece Hall fans. You absolutely hate to see it. Breece Hall is a faller after the last couple weeks, and it feels bad when you see a matchup in a stat line like this. Both players obviously viable in fantasy, but you hate to see that if you own Breece Hall. Braylon Allen's on the uprise, and Breece Hall's on the decline after this game. All right, receiving wise, I mean, Garrett Wilson is the one in this game. He has a bunch of yards. Still only 5 receptions, though. He has 8 targets, which leads the team. It looks to me like, weirdly, Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers like haven't clicked yet. You think playing together so long, and I think I said this last week, you would think playing together so long that chemistry would easily translate over into this situation, but it obviously hasn't. Maybe it starts to click and the team becomes a lot better than it is, and the offense becomes a lot better than it is, but it hasn't yet, and I think it just comes down to both guys in the situation being trending towards being washed, and they're both trending towards being like they are older guys. So I just don't think they're the same players, and the expectations there for the Jets and how this was going to look, especially with Davante Adams there now, is a little too high for who the players are nowadays. Don't get me wrong, though. There's definitely going to be some games here coming up where they get on track and they get on the same page and you see what you want to see. But it's not going to be consistent. It's not going to lead them to a playoff run or anything like that. So Garrett Wilson's still the guy there for now. We'll see if Davante Adams starts to eat into the target share even more. Don't want to start really any of those other guys. Tyler Conklin has fallen in the end zone twice now in the past 2 weeks. However, he's gotten 4 targets in this game. Ugly, ugly, ugly. Don't want that. Garrett Wilson, like as we don't want to move on too quickly, Garrett Wilson's a start. Davante Adams, you have to start him, but it's terrible looking right now. Instead of being a wide receiver 1, Davante Adams is a low-end wide receiver 2 as of right now. Garrett Wilson's like a higher-end wide receiver 2. He just looks good. He looks like the young guy who Aaron Rodgers is still going to give targets, and he's just more explosive. So, shout out Garrett Wilson, though. A player that I think is – I like watching Garrett Wilson play. Talked a little bit about Breece Hall already. Not exciting for the Jets. As I'm saying this, though, like I just want to – like, although I'm hating on them, I don't want to make it sound like they're never going to win another game. I would not be shocked at all if they rattle off like 4 out of the next 6 games are wins. And then all of a sudden they're still sort of in the playoff hunt, you know? It's just funny to me how much like the expectations were, and now they're just like failing so hard. So we'll see if they turn it around. They have some winnable matchups for sure. Moving on, Drake May gets hurt in this game. Drake May looks good, in my opinion. I mean, he's on a bad team with not a lot of good weapons, but I think his ability to move around, and he looks good. Very small sample size in this game before he gets hurt, but shout out to Drake May and to the Patriots, I guess, because Drake May looks like he has some potential. Jacoby Brissett comes into the game, and he plays fine. By no means is that stat line exciting. Doesn't score a touchdown, throws for under 150 yards, but does enough for them to win. So, I mean, shout out to the Jets defense for just like letting them down. I think the offense just doesn't put them in a lot of like great positions, and then the Jets defense just fumbles the ball, and lets the opposing team drive or score, or it's just like fails in clutch time. It's like everything that could go wrong goes wrong at the worst times for the Jets, and including their defense. So we see them stick to the running game in this one. Ramondre Stevenson does pretty much nothing on the ground, but still scores 2 touchdowns. So shout out to Ramondre Stevenson for squeaking into the end zone. The passing game here, it's just hard to analyze this game because Drake May went out. Hunter Henry's still a guy I'm excited about in this offense. Other than that, I'm not really excited about anyone besides like Ramondre, and good matchups is a great play. We'll see how that team continues to look throughout the season. I think with Drake May, the offense is a lot better, or it's trending in the right direction. Let's move out. Shout out to the Patriots for giving us a funny victory. Falcons-Buccaneers, definitely a lot closer this game than it maybe should have been or was even. The Falcons find themselves again offensively against the Buccaneers, which is when they found themselves offensively a few weeks ago when they played the Buccaneers. Kirk Cousins went off. The receivers, for a lot of the receivers in the Falcons offense, including Kyle Pitts, had a fantastic game. We still see our guys on the ground have some looks and have some usage. They still look great. Brian Robinson, or not Brian, I get Brian and Bijan mixed up so much. Bijan Robinson has a fantastic game, mostly through the air in this one, which makes sense. I think the strength of the Buccaneers defense, which isn't a good defense at all, is the running game, like the rush defense. So Bijan Robinson 8 in the passing game in this one. Not as much usage, like not a lot happening in the running game from either back, but it didn't matter because they pretty much moved the ball out well in the air. It's kind of annoying as a Drake London fantasy owner. Like every single guy ate in this game besides Drake London, pretty much. It's like after how good Drake London's been the past few weeks, now that he does nothing while everyone else in the team in a good matchup, everyone else in the offense has a great game. Kirk Cousins throws the heck out of a ball. I think that's because the Buccaneers have I think they game plan to shut down Drake London. I'm trying to think who the Buccaneers have at corner. And for some reason, I thought they had a really good corner, but I can't think of the name. And then I might be wrong. And they might not even have that good of a corner, and they just planned to shut Drake London down, which I think they did in this one. Big game for Bijan. Big game for Kyle Pitts, though. You start them every week. Big game for Kirk Cousins. He's a guy that has a good rest of the season schedule, so I'm playing Kirk Cousins in a lot of matchups through the rest of the season. Drake London's still a 1, even though he's a down game. Every guy has a down game. And then guys like Darnell Mooney's a viable flex guy if you have to. The other receivers I'm not too excited about. Last thing on the Falcons is they need to be careful here because what I thought was a very strong defense at the beginning of the season is proving to be like Ravens kind of defense, where I'd say the Ravens defense has holes in it. The Falcons defense, you can move the ball on the Falcons defense in the air and on the ground. So that's something they need to watch out of as a Falcon, if you're a Falcons person, because you're going to lose some games if you're letting teams score a bunch of points on you. Now, while the Buccaneers aren't a good, a bad offense, they had a bunch of injuries. No Mike Evans, no Godwin. So, at the beginning of this game, it looked like Baker was going to just cook the Falcons, and it was going to be like a signature win for Baker Mayfield without a bunch of weapons. And then they just cooled off, and he started throwing picks, and he looked rattled. So they lose this game barely. I don't think it was as close as the score says. I think it was a more easy win than the score says. I forgot what happened late, maybe an onside kick recovery or something crazy, but an expected loss for the Buccaneers, I think, after they've lost their main weapons. They need to be careful in the next 4 weeks without those weapons. They need to find a way to win a couple games if they're going to stay in the playoff race. Luckily for them, the Panthers and the Saints are in that division, so they're going to have some easy matchups. Falcons are going to run away with that division, I think, though. They're just more solid and healthy all around as of right now. So we'll see what happens. Fantasy-wise, Baker Mayfield takes a hit with the receivers being hurt, but he's still viable. He throws 3 touchdowns in this one. They throw the ball 50 times, so he's going to get some opportunity to put up some points. The rushing attack in this game, they did not utilize the rush very much at all. They were down most of the game. So it was a terrible game script. Bucky Irving leads the team in carries, though, so I will say Bucky Irving looks better on the ground running the ball. He looks more explosive. He is battling some injuries, though, as is Rachaad White, who is the other guy there. They're going to use Rachaad White more often, more consistently, I'll say, in the passing game. You do see Bucky Irving getting 7 receptions on 7 targets in this game. So if you're a Bucky Irving guy, that makes you or Bucky Irving person, that makes you very excited. They're going to have to rely on the running backs, both of them, to catch the ball a lot while they don't have Mike Evans or Godwin anymore in the lineup. So very viable in PPR, I think, both of them. They do cancel each other out still a little, though, so the ceiling's not going to be there every week. You are happy that Rachaad White gets in the end zone here. Bucky Irving catches 7 passes, so he still has a fine day. The big winner for the offense in Tampa is Cade Otton. 10 targets, 9 receptions, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns. Cade Otton went off, and I think he's going to continue to go off while the receivers are hurt. So, McMillan, Palmer, Shepard, Sean Tucker, all of these guys that were like waiver wire pickups and the guys that everyone went out to get after the injuries happened look like they're just not good enough yet. They're just not good. So I think Jalen McMillan's the guy that has the potential. The rest of those guys droppable still, even without the receivers and the receivers being hurt. So 4-4 team still for the Buccaneers. They have some wiggle room. Hopefully they get Mike Evans back in the next 3 or 4 weeks and they can make a little bit of a push late in the season. Falcons look good, though. They just have some holes in the defense. All right, Jaguars and Packers. Almost a shocker of the week. Packers somehow let the Jaguars play with them here. Like, Packers should have just smashed them, and the Jaguars just weren't going away. It's just one of those classic NFL games, though, where it's like almost a trap game for the Packers, I think. And the Packers were good enough that they didn't let it happen. Starting with the Packers, I guess. I mean, they're a great team. The problem here is Jordan Love's health, and he gets hurt again in this one and misses half the game. And it's maybe part of the reason why they didn't beat him by more. You hate to see it. I mean, when Jordan Love's in there, that team is so fun and that offense is so good. Malik Willis is obviously like capable. You just hope he doesn't have to be in there because it limits the passing game so much, limits the whole offense so much. So hopefully Jordan Love, he's got like a groin injury, they're saying. It sounds like he has they're optimistic he can play and not even miss a game here. But it's like the injuries are stacking up for him, and it's scary. You need him to be healthy, especially come playoff time. And for fantasy, we need him to be healthy as well. It was a very good game and a good matchup for our Josh Jacobs. 2 touchdowns, the 25 rush attempts, and 127 yards on the ground. He also gets a catch out of the backfield, which went for nothing. But, I mean, Josh Jacobs' explosion game, it was a fantastic matchup, so you hoped to see it. He has a bad matchup this next week, so limit expectations, unfortunately. We all know I'm all with you guys. I have Josh Jacobs. I really like Josh Jacobs and hope he can win me my fantasy leagues. However, this was a fantastic matchup for him, and he took advantage. I don't expect this to happen every week. So, shout out to him, though. He had a great game. And then the passing game, it was cooking before Jordan Love got hurt. Romeo Doubs is, like, somehow emerging as, like, the 1B to Jaden Reed's 1A. He looked really good, and I am excited for Romeo Doubs if Jordan Love's going to be in there. Tyler Kraft catches the touchdown. He's a baller. He's emerged a lot and becoming a solid tight end 1 in the NFL. Easy start in fantasy. Jaden Reed, you have to continue to start in fantasy especially with Jordan Love, just because it's like he's explosive. He gets looks. Like, he's the most reliable fantasy-wise as of right now. Like I said, Jaden Reed's the 1A. Romeo Doubs is approaching the 1B if Jordan Love's playing. It's been a little interesting to see the target share and how Romeo Doubs has looked after he's come back from that weird suspension where he like was upset and like got suspended for a game, and now all of a sudden they're like giving him targets. It's so funny. Like, these wide receivers can moan and groan and cry, and then all of a sudden they just get rewarded for it, which is cool for me because I did pick up Romeo Doubs off the waiver wire after all of that happened, and now it looks like it's paying off if Jordan Love is healthy. I can't stress that enough. It's not going to pay off if Jordan Love is not going to be healthy. With Malik Willis in there, I don't even think he saw a target, or he definitely didn't have a reception, I don't think. So Christian Watson gets a little bit involved in this game, has 6 targets. It was going to be an awesome high-scoring passing volume game, but then Jordan Love went out and it just ruined it. So most of these numbers are from when Jordan Love was in there in the first half, and then he sat in the second half, and it's just like it just stopped there. So imagine these numbers if it was a whole nother half of throwing the ball. The guys I want in this offense in the passing game, Tyler Kraft, tight end 1 for sure. Jaden Reed, 1, wide receiver number 1. Romeo Dobbs, number 2, wide receiver wise. And then Christian Watson and Wicks are just like end of your bench guys. And if like you can play them if someone else gets hurt, but like they're going to be so inconsistent every week. It's almost droppable. And then we see the defense, the Packers defense, who's a good defense, just kind of let the Jaguars feast a little bit in this game, which is kind of weird to see. They do get a couple turnovers. I think McKinney has his typical interception in this game, which he gets like every week it seems like, but letting the Jaguars score 27 on you, like I said, it was kind of like a trap game vibe. Packers do pull it off with a injured quarterback and a backup quarterback, so shout out to them. You take the wins when you can get them. Let's move on to the Jaguars for a second. Playing against a solid defense, they looked good offensively. I mean, Trevor Lawrence kind of has a Trevor Lawrence game where he throws a couple touchdowns, has some yards, not a great completion percentage, and ends up throwing a pick or two. That's Trevor Lawrence right there for you. Tank Bigsby got the majority of the workload with ETN out in this one. Doesn't have an insane game, but definitely a viable play if he's the only running back in the offense. Absolutely. Brian Thomas Jr. has a good touchdown catch in this one. Otherwise, everyone else was kind of mediocre. Evan Ingram also got going. I will say Brian Thomas Jr. went down with an injury, and I think he's going to be out 2 to 4 weeks. And Christian Kirk, season-ending leg injury. I think he maybe tore his ACL. So absolutely brutal for the Jaguars offense. That offense is going to be very hard to watch, I think, for the next few weeks until they kind of figure out some new guys. Watch out for Evan Ingram, and then watch out for Brian Thomas when he gets back and healthy because they're going to be getting a lot of looks. Evan Ingram's the guy right now through the next few weeks. So while those guys are hurt, as far as the wide receivers go, who knows? It could be Brenton Strange. He's also tight end, I think. It could be Parker Washington. I just don't want any of those guys on my fantasy team. I don't care who's the one. While those guys are hurt, they're not going to be explosive enough for me to want to pick them up. I think it goes to the running backs. ETN's going to be back this next week, so I think ETN and Bigsby are going to get a lot of looks, and then Evan Ingram. So not going to be a fun offense. They're already a bad team. Another one of those teams where like I'll be surprised if they win more than 2 more games. If they end up in the end of the season having 5 wins, I'd be shocked. Jaguars down very bad this year. Not only are they just not very good, don't seem to be very well coached this year, but also they have injuries going on now. Awful for them. Let's move on though. Colts Texans. Fun game. Interesting game that we're gonna have to spend a minute on for sure. Let's start with the Colts. We've said this in past videos. Anthony Richardson is not good, and he proves it even more so in this game. It's also the controversial thing where he has to come out for a play because he was tired. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but like also it's your starting franchise, supposed to be tough quarterback. Like he's asking you to come out in a crucial situation in the game. Like, get out of here, dude. Like I don't want you playing on my team. Put in Joe Flacco, and that's what they're doing. We heard it yesterday, I think. Anthony Richardson's being benched because he's not very good, and Joe Flacco's going to finish out the season, it seems like. They're not giving up on Anthony Richardson, supposedly, but that's kind of like the Bryce Young situation. I just don't think they're very good, and they're probably not going to ever be very good. Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson. Maybe they prove us wrong eventually, but, man, for Anthony Richardson, it's not good. For Colts fans, it's not very good in the sense that, like, you drafted this guy very high and now he's looking like he may be a bust. But for the rest of the season, you've seen enough from Joe Flacco that he's very competent. Now your offense is suddenly fun. They probably win this game with Joe Flacco's quarterback. That's how crazy of a difference it is, and it's actually insane to me watching them play, how much better Joe Flacco looks and how much better the offense just suddenly looks when Joe Flacco's playing, opposed to Anthony Richardson. So, and exciting for the Colts for the rest of the season as far as like fantasy value goes and maybe being able to make it in the playoffs. Not exciting for them because it looks like their air quotes future franchise quarterback is terrible and not very good at all. So kind of mixed emotions if you're a Colts person, but fantasy wise here, I mean, like I said already, I don't know what to really else to say besides they lost the game pretty much because Anthony Richardson's not very good. Fantasy wise, you don't want to play Joe Flacco in fantasy unless you really have to, but this does make all the receivers and Jonathan Taylor even more viable. Jonathan Taylor's a smash play now because now the risk of Anthony Richardson stealing goal line carries and touchdowns is gone. And the offense should be better in general, so they're probably going to have more goal line carries. So Jonathan Taylor may be a league winner with Joe Flacco playing. You have Josh Downs, who's going to be the obvious number one wide receiver. You have guys like Alec Pierce and Pittman that follow him behind now that Joe Flacco's quarterback. They just are going to have more consistent and better opportunities. And then you have like Adonai Mitchell that if one of those guys gets hurt, maybe he shows some signs of life. I'm not really excited about any of the tight ends there. So probably still not even startable tight end wise, even with Flacco in there. Moving on to the Texans though, I mean, they played this game against a terrible quarterback in Anthony Richardson, but they still barely won. Now, divisional game here, so it's like you can't really critique a win too much because they're tough always, no matter what. But, yeah, I'm just not going to be able to do it because I just think the Texans are actually good, and that's what happens sometimes in some of these games. C.J. Stroud plays fine. He's yet to have a pop-off game. Joe Mixon is a dog. Now that he's back and healthy, that their team's able to run the ball and it opens up a lot for them. So hopefully he's able to continue to do so as we get down to the receiving core here, which we have a lot to talk about. Stephon Diggs was having a good game, and Tank Dell finally catches a touchdown. Now, Stephon Diggs tears his ACL in this game. And we already know Nico Collins is on the IR with a hamstring injury. He should be coming back in the next couple weeks. Probably going to look pretty ugly while Nico Collins still isn't in there. I mean, obviously, Tank Dell's going to get some looks. Dalton Schultz is going to continue to get some looks. Some of these bottom of the roster wide receivers are going to have to continue to get looks and step up a little bit. I think they're going to try to rely on the run game even more. But teams now for the next week or two are going to be able to just hone in on that running game and shut down Joe Mixon and then make Tank Dell and John Mechie and Robert Woods beat you. So when Nico Collins gets back, it'll be fine. It'll probably be just fine. They're going to still be a great team. They have a good defense. It's a little scary, though, now that you don't have that depth in Diggs anymore, and we already see Nico Collins having an injury and coming back off the injury now. But if someone else like him or Tank Dell get hurt now, then all of a sudden you're down pretty bad. Fantasy-wise, Tank Dell takes a step up. He's just going to continue to get more opportunities even when Nico Collins is back. Nico Collins is a league winner if he's able to come back and be healthy. We'll see how it looks, though. I mean, their defense is good enough to keep them in games. Solid team. I think a solid coach, solid quarterback. They should be fine. It's a team I'm rooting for. If, I'd rather have them than the Chiefs kind of deal. So, tough injury to Stephon Diggs makes me a little nervous. We need to see more. They need Nico Collins back. So yeah, they pull off the win in this one. Good divisional win. They needed to win this kind of game with a bad quarterback playing on the other side of the ball, and they do it. So solid win. Got to just give them your props, even though it wasn't pretty. Just move on to the next week. Saints Chargers, one of the most boring, awful games of the week to watch. Saints score 8 points. Chargers easily win. What did we think was going to happen after watching the Saints and the Broncos game? The Saints have no offense whatsoever. It looks horrible. Maybe Derek Carr comes back this week and they show some signs of life, but Spencer Rattler's not it right now. You can't expect him to be good right now. He actually, I think, got hurt in this game at one point, and they put someone else in, or they just put someone else in because Spencer Rattler wasn't doing good. Alvin Kamara is very, very limited with how bad the offense is. When Derek Carr's back in there, he's going to be that back to closer back to normal kind of player where he's getting a lot of passes out of the backfield. maybe the run game opens up a little bit. Don't expect a crazy turn, but it'll be better for sure. Chris Olave gets going in this game without Derek Carr playing, so that's exciting. If you're a Chris Olave person, he's battled some injuries. He's battled a terrible offense, no quarterback. He's had a tough go through the first half of the season. He seems to be healthy-ish now, healthy enough to play at least. And then Derek Carr seems like he's about to come back. So I'm really going to be keeping my eye on what it looks like, what the Saints look like with Derek Carr back in there, because they should look a lot better. I don't think they're going to look great, though, but there's going to be some great fantasy value still on the team with Derek Carr. And I think that's going to show itself with Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave. So we knew the Saints were going to lose here. So I don't really know how much else I need to go into this. I mean, Taysom Hill plays in this game. He gets a lot of these crazy looks, so maybe he's viable tight end-wise. Otherwise, you want Olave in good matchups, especially hopefully with Derek Carr, he continues to look good. I mean, he had 14 targets in this game. Alvin Kamara had 11. So it's pretty much now that Rashid Shaheed's hurt, the offense is going to have to be funneling through Olave, Kamara, and then every now and then they'll do some weird stuff with Taysom Hill. So that's it. With Derek Carr back, I'm pretty excited for those players. Maybe your season, I don't know as in real life wise how much better it's going to look. I don't know how many more wins you're going to be able to rattle off as a Saints fan, if you're a Saints fan. But at least you're going to have, it's going to look better. It's looked horrible the last few weeks. And the Chargers took advantage, unfortunately. I would have loved to see the Chargers lose this game, but all they needed to do was enough, and that's what they did. Justin Herbert didn't even have that crazy good of a game, but he puts up some yards and throws 2 touchdowns at the end of it because the Saints are just down that badly. J.K. Dobbins finds his way in the end zone. Didn't even have that good of a game against a struggling Saints defense, though. And then we see McConkey have a fantastic game. Maybe an emergence game for McConkey. He's the only receiver I want to play in that offense. Otherwise, it's him, Dobbins. If you need to start Herbert, you can. Don't really have a tight end to speak of. Although Will Dissly did get 7 targets. So maybe you keep an eye on him for fantasy. But Chargers, like I said about them and the Cardinals last week, they're a mid-team. And in this case, a mid-team was plenty to easily win against a pretty down bad team. And that's what happened. Not a lot of exciting stuff to note in this game besides McConkey had a great game and Derek Carr's coming back soon, so maybe Olave and Kamara continue or maybe even uptick their production from that game. Bills and Seahawks. Definitely have to spend a second on this game just because it was surprising, in my opinion. I mean, we all know the Bills are pretty good. When they play their game, they're going to beat a lot of teams. And that's what they did in this one. The Bills just dominated the Seahawks. They pretty much had their way with them. I mean, the Seahawks defense just suddenly just disappeared. I don't think we ever thought the Seahawks defense was great, but playing against the Bills proved that the Seahawks defense isn't good. Josh Allen has a good game, not a great game. What happened here is James Cook cooked. I mean, he has 2 touchdowns, 6.5 yards per carry, 111 yards. He was awesome. All they needed to do in this game was give James Cook the ball, and they were going to destroy them. The Seahawks didn't have enough to stop the run. They didn't have enough to even stop the pass. You see Khalil Shakir get 10 targets, 9 receptions, over 100 yards in this game. Keon Coleman catches a great touchdown pass. Kincaid and Dawson Knox get looks. Kincaid has a great game with a touchdown and 7 targets. Even though there's not a lot of yards there, Kincaid gets going. They couldn't stop Kincaid. You see Amari Cooper have 2 targets in this game for 3 yards, and the Bills still won by 21 points easily. That's crazy to me. The Bills are just going to have games like this, I think, where they're just spreading the ball around, and there's going to be games where one guy goes off, and there's going to be a game when one guy doesn't do anything, and there's going to be games where it's completely switched the next game, and then James Cook and Josh Allen are the constant. I am pretty, if you have Khalil Shakir on your team, I'm pretty confident in him right now just because of his consistency. I don't think he has a very high ceiling because I think the touchdown order is going to be Josh Allen, James Cook, and then Keon Coleman, Kincaid, everybody, and then Shakir. Unfortunately, if you have Shakir, but man, he's been really consistent and gets a lot of targets still. So shout out to him. Keon Coleman's starting to slowly emerge more and more. I really like Dalton Kincaid as a tight end. So anytime Kincaid gets some looks in the passing game, I think it's a good idea for the Bills. It's just another weapon. And then Amari Cooper in this game did nothing. They didn't need him to do anything. I almost guarantee you next week he's going to have a good game. Week 9, he's going to have a good game. And it's because I play him in my league, in my main home league in fantasy against one of my my closest childhood friends that's like I'm most competitive in this game of the season. I want to beat him this bad. And he's got Amari Cooper. So this week, Amari Cooper did nothing. And now that he's going against me in fantasy, Amari Cooper's probably going to have 20 fantasy points against me this next week. So shout out Keenan. I hope I beat you in fantasy this week easily. We'll see what happens, though. It should be a good matchup. But, yeah, the Bills are just so good. Even their defense showed up in this game. So, don't really know what else to say about the Bills, but, shout out you guys. Once again, another team. I'd much rather you guys win than the Chiefs. Someone's got to figure it out. Moving on to the Seahawks. I mean, they didn't have DK in this game, so that's probably why the Bills' defense looks so good. They could just focus on everything else, and they shut down the running game. So, Geno Smith looks horrible in this game. A typical, I'm going to complete my passes, but nothing ever is going to happen because I don't make enough explosive plays. And even though the game script needed him to make explosive plays, he just wasn't willing to do so. And they score 10 points because of it. Kenneth Walker, like I said, they shut down the run. Between the game script and the defense just honing in on the run, they weren't able to do anything. Kenneth Walker does absolutely nothing in the ground. Zach Charbonnet ends up scoring a rushing touchdown, but okay, he gets nothing else at all. You would have thought the game script would have shown you more passes, even with especially with how bad the run game was. But we saw a normal amount, in my opinion. I mean, Jackson Smith and Jigba gets 7 targets, has a typical Jackson Smith and Jigba game where he just isn't able to get into the end zone and not a ton of yards on those targets. Kenneth Walker catches passes out of the backfield, so he gets looks there. That's why you want Kenneth Walker more in fantasy. And then that's it. I mean, that's why they were so bad. Their next best receiver had 1 reception for 9 yards on 3 targets in Tyler Lockett. They just have I don't know if they're proving that their whole offense revolves around DK or what, but obviously it wasn't a good matchup against a great Bills team and a good Bills defense. But, man, they looked horrible in this game. So we'll see if they can bounce back. They've proven to us this year before that they can look bad in one game and then look really good in the next. So we'll see. They just came off a win against the Atlanta Falcons, who I just continue to give props to most weeks. So they had a good win against a good team, and then they had a bad loss against a good team. So we'll see what they do this next week. Keep an eye to see if DK Metcalf's coming back. Otherwise, I mean, you just have to start Kenneth Walker and you probably have to start JSN. Don't feel good about it. With DK who comes back, I'm almost to the point where I don't think JSN's even a player that you have to start. He's just a bench guy, and then for certain matchups and bye weeks, you can play him. While DK's out, you have to play him, though. Their defense gets exposed by the Bills' offense, too, which makes sense. That happens to a lot of teams. I don't think their defense is horrific, just I don't think they're very good either. Mediocre feels right for the Seahawks defense. See if the Seahawks can bounce back. Shout out to the Bills for being good. Of course, here we're talking about the Broncos. Now, we have to spend a minute on this game because it's my team here, as you all know, but don't think it was a very exciting game. Even watching this game this week, I was kind of just man, obviously I'm happy the Broncos are winning pretty easily, but this game's super boring. So let's just get the Panthers out of the way so I can talk about the Broncos. The Panthers, as we know, are horrible. They're probably going to get the first pick overall. If they don't get Shedeur Sanders, then I don't know what they're doing. I mean, it's going to be a bad look for them because they have Bryce Young, but maybe they go Travis Hunter route. I don't know. They are horrible. And watching this game, this is the first time because it was the Broncos that I really sat down and watched a full Panthers game and evaluated stuff. They are so bad. And I don't think the quarterback really changes all that much because I didn't think Bryce Young looked that horrible in this game. Obviously bad. But I think between him and Andy Dalton, there's not as much of a difference as most people think. The thing that's bad right now is they're not very well coached. They have a lot of bad, like, lack of, no, I don't want to say intelligence, but like lack of focus offensively and like taking stupid penalties. There was one drive where they had like 2 delay game penalties in the matter of like 4 plays. It was ridiculous watching the game. It made me think of like when the Broncos were at their very worst the last 10 years. It's like it's like laughable almost. And it almost doesn't feel good winning a game like that. And that's why, like I said last week, I was like, if the Panthers somehow beat the Broncos, I'm going to come on here and be ranting because that's how bad they are. So, I mean, this game was essentially 28-7, and then the Broncos have a terrible turnover, and the Panthers go down and score to make the score look a lot more respectable. It probably should have been 35-7 Broncos, but the Broncos just made some also stupid, dumb mistakes, which we'll talk about here in a second. Finishing up on the Panthers, though, building off of that, they're a bad team. Not very well coached, just not a lot of good players at all. They trade Deontay Johnson. We'll see what the offense looks like with Adam Thielen. Not expecting a lot if Bryce Young's the quarterback, though. I think the only reason why they can have a chance to win any game is because they have a couple defensive players that are decent. Even then, though, there's just not enough talent to be consistent at all. So, ugly Panthers team, probably going to get the top pick. Fantasy-wise, you got Chuba Hubbard, who got shut down in this game, I believe, by the Broncos. Let me just check Chuba Hubbard's stats. Yeah, did not do very much at all. And then you have Jonathan Brooks coming in there soon, so we'll see what that looks like. We'll see what Thielen looks like getting back. Otherwise, I'm not interested in anything. Their defense isn't good enough. Their offense isn't good enough to help their defense, so their defense is really bad. Not a lot of fantasy stuff you want to be playing in your lineup for the Panthers. Broncos, okay. Interesting game here for the Broncos, although it was boring for sure at times, and the score doesn't reflect what I needed. I needed them to win easier, but it's fine. The story of this game is Bo Nix, and there's definitely asterisks around all of this stuff I'm saying because it was the Panthers. But this is the first game that Bo Nix looked really good. He looked really good as a passer, and I think going into the game, Sean Payton, we're planning to utilize how bad the Panthers are to just get Bo Nix going. And that's what they did. Bo Nix has a fantastic game. He looks really good in this game. Like I said, the score should have been 35-7, and Bo Nix should have had even a bigger game, but his receivers were fumbling the ball. I'll get to that in a second. But shout out to Bo Nix. He's a guy that I haven't fully bought into as a Broncos fan yet, but a game like this gives me some hope, even though it was against a bad team. We'll see if he can do it in the next few weeks against a very tough schedule. Next week against the Ravens, and then we have the Chiefs, and then they have the Falcons. So we'll see how Bo Nix looks then. Always feels good to play good, even if it's a bad matchup. And anytime you play good in the NFL, no matter what, it's a great sign. So shout out to Bo Nix. Let's talk about the running backs really quick. They didn't, you see Javonte Williams carry the load, and then Jaleel gets some carries. Audric Estime has been fumbling, so he's kind of he's not going to get a lot of looks the rest of the season, I don't think, without an injury. They don't do a lot, though, which is annoying. I think the Panthers, their goal was to just shut down the run and make Bo Nix throw the ball, and that's what they did. It's just they're not good enough team for that to pay off, and you see a very down game for all of the running backs. They just didn't do a lot. I will say Jaleel looked explosive. Maybe they need to give him more carries, but I'm saying this every single week with the Broncos backfield. It's maybe Audric Estime can do something. Oh, Jaleel looks really good this game. Oh, Jaleel looked bad that game. Oh, Javonte Williams had a good game. It's just who knows who's going to look good in any game with this Broncos backfield. You just hope one guy has the ability to show some life in each game, and you don't even care who it is. So I wouldn't mind personally as a Broncos fan seeing Jaleel McLaughlin get more looks. Again, he was doing this against a bad team. Who knows? I've also seen him have a lot of bad runs in other games. He is more explosive, though. Javonte is a guy that, late in the game, he'll hurt you. He'll hurt to tackle. But as far as making big plays, Jaleel McLaughlin has that ability. So fantasy-wise, you don't love it, especially in what should have been a very good matchup. Javonte does nothing, so he's just inconsistent. And then obviously it's going to be hard to get consistent stuff out of Jaleel if he's only getting like 8 touches a game. And then going back to Bo Nix really quick, since he's emerged as a rusher, he scores a rushing touchdown in this game. He is fantasy viable. And he's honestly a pretty good play in good matchups, especially if you need to play him. Courtland Sutton, definitely one of these games where it's like pros and cons for Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton had like a breakout game, you could say. 8 receptions, 11 targets, 100 yards. They made it an effort to get Courtland going against a bad team that was letting them just throw on them. They wanted to get their star receiver going. Still leaves a lot to be desired for Courtland Sutton. Like, even though he's the one on this team, he's like the 3 on several other teams in the NFL. He's just not as good as Broncos country needs him to be, and maybe for me wants him to be. He's a wide receiver too, and he's the one on our team, which is a bad look. He has a fumbling problem, which I think teams have scouted for him now and noticed that he's had a fumbling problem. And it seems like every time he catches the ball, I'm just hoping he doesn't get hurt and he doesn't fumble the ball. So that's where we're at with Courtland Sutton. Even though he has a good game here, I can't get too high on Courtland Sutton because of the negatives that have come with him and his inability to prove that he's like a star, a superstar. He's just kind of like he's like a high-end wide receiver too. And it's just not that exciting. We need Bo Nix to have more weapons than that. So shout out to him, I guess, for having a good game. But I wouldn't be surprised if we go and we play the Ravens and they have better players covering Courtland Sutton, and he has like 3-4 targets for like 2 receptions next week and does nothing. So we'll see. Not super high on the receiving group for the Broncos as a Broncos fan. You see guys like Vele and the tight ends get involved a lot in this game. It was good to see the tight ends get involved in this game. I don't think the tight ends are necessarily, any of them are all that good. However, it's good to see that there's some hope for like a new weapon to emerge. Like Adam Trotman had a decent game. Don't expect that to happen every game. None of those guys are like crazy, freakish athletic. So they're guys that are, if you're scheming up the play correctly and executing the play correctly, they can make plays. But other than that, that's all they're going to give you. Lil Jordan Humphrey also has a horrific fumble in this game. He's the second leading guy in targets. You just can't be fumbling as a veteran receiver. Like, stop fumbling the ball. You need to control the ball. The Broncos are not a good enough team to be turning over the ball. They have a rookie quarterback that you're trying to support. Stop. If the rookie quarterback gets the ball to you and you catch the ball, like, finish the play. Stop fumbling the ball and giving. That's another reason why the Panthers were closer than they should have been in this game, because 2 stupid fumbles, and they're really ugly fumbles. One was on like the first drive for the Broncos in the game, and the other one was at the very end of the game when they were about to get a touchdown, and they're fumbling the ball there as veteran receivers. Like, what are you guys doing? Wake up. I loved what Sean Payton, there's some quotes after the game was like, it can't just be for these receivers, it can't just be like, oh, my bad. You need, like, if you're going to continue to do it, he's going to replace you. And that's what his quote was about, like. And then building off that too, like Troy Franklin, a guy I'm like kind of excited about, like has another horrific drop on a perfectly placed deep ball from Bo Nix. It's just like none of these guys are helping Bo Nix out, and now we're about to play good teams. So someone needs to step up, or more than one person needs to step up, and this team needs to start making some plays, or we're gonna go on like a 4 or 5 game losing streak. And all of this good stuff that happened at the beginning of the season here is just gonna be like for naught. And then everyone on the outside is just going to be like, well, yeah, you guys started off good because you beat the Panthers and beat the Saints and you beat the Raiders. Like, no duh, you guys had a 5-3 record. And that's what I'm scared of as of right now, is that that's going to be the case here in 4 weeks. Just start. You guys, we have the coach. We have an emerging young quarterback. We just need guys to help him. And no one is consistently looking good around him right now. We'll see if people can step up a little bit. Julian McLaughlin, like I said, is explosive. He's a guy that scores some touchdowns, some good touchdowns for this team. Maybe the emergence of some of these tight ends does something. They're about to play some way tougher opponents than the Panthers, so we'll see how it looks. That's my Broncos spiels for this week. We'll see what that looks like going into week 9 against some way tougher opponents coming up. Excuse me. All right. I know this is a very long video, but we're almost done here. Stick with me. I got a few more games and a few more decent things to talk about here. So this will probably be one of the shorter reactions. Chiefs beat the Raiders. Did we really ever think the Raiders had a chance? It was like a trap game here. The score was closer than, you may have thought. But, Raiders were never going to win. The Raiders just don't have anybody to make plays to beat a good team like that. And even though they had a valiant effort, that's all it was. And that's what it shows in the score. They had a valiant 20-point effort. They weren't good enough to pull it off, though. They really have no one on this team that I want in fantasy besides Bowers. I'm not sure Bowers got hurt. I'll admit that right now. I've seen some things that, scrolling through media, I've saw that maybe he's dealing with some sort of injury from this game, but I think he's fine. Other than Bowers, though, I don't want anything to do with the team unless it's like a perfect matchup and maybe you play like Madison or Jacoby Myers. Otherwise, I'm fine. The Chiefs continue to look like the Chiefs do. They have a pretty darn good defense that doesn't make a lot of mistakes. And then the offense is the same thing. They just don't make a lot of mistakes, even though they're not good, like the defense is. So they're not the same thing. They just don't. What am I saying? As I'm saying that, they don't make a lot of mistakes. That's just the defense. The offense makes all kinds of mistakes. Patrick Mahomes has his weekly interception in this one. Of course, looks better because he's playing against one of the worst teams in the NFL here. So he looks better, but just so not excited about anything in the Chiefs offense, really. Kareem Hunt's good. Travis Kelce's good. Fantasy-wise, though, I'm not excited about Worthy. I'm not excited about DeAndre Hopkins. Sure, they'll gain chemistry throughout the second half of the season. Going to the playoffs, they'll probably be just fine. But fantasy-wise, for the next 7 weeks, I'm out on that. I'm out on all of that. We'll see. The Chiefs do have some good matchups, so there's going to be probably a game or two where they look like the old Chiefs. And I'll be on here this was the game this was like a get-right game. This is like the game that was the good matchup that they took advantage of. But other than that, they're not good. They're not a good offense. Now that Rashee Rice is hurt, Pacheco's hurt. They just want to run the ball, and they're just boring on offense now. Simple as that. This game, they were able to take advantage of how bad the Raiders' defense was, and they were able to throw the ball around in the red zone a little bit. But it's the same thing we've seen all season long with them. They don't have the firepower and the talent on offense to execute at the expectations that were set from a few years ago. It's a completely different offense, and they're way more boring, and it's just more of slow and steady wins the race with the Chiefs now. And they have a game manager, Patrick Mahomes, that's turned into a game manager that's good enough to make the plays when he needs to. Obviously, we've seen how good Patrick Mahomes is before. We know what he can do, but with the team he's on now, they're just slow and steady wins the race, and when they absolutely need Mahomes to make a big play, he will find a way to do something. So that's their team now. Fantasy-wise, it's miserable, and I am so happy. Yeah, that's the end of it because I already talked about the Raiders. Not a whole lot to say there. I'm so happy to be rid in my personal leagues. I've gotten rid of Mahomes in the league that I had him. So get out of my lineup. Don't need you in my team anymore. I only had you in my team because I assumed that you guys were going to be good like you always are, and then I got you on my team and you're bad. Let's move on to the most fun game of the week here. Not fun game, but craziest ending, I guess, of maybe the season. Bears and Commanders, battle of the 1 and 2 overall QBs. Jaden Daniels gets the better of Caleb Williams. You thought going into this game that it was a decent matchup. I definitely thought it was going to be higher scoring than this. Now, the result makes sense because it's two rookie quarterbacks, again, going against two, even though the Commanders' defense has struggled, they got Dan Quinn as their guy there, so you can call them a defensive-oriented team almost, and then the Bears have a good defense with a defensive head coach as well. So the outcome makes sense as far as it being lower scoring than you thought. Ugly until the last drive. This game was so ugly. Just field goals and pretty much nothing going on. Caleb Williams looked horrible. Of course, I started him in fantasy this past week because of the hype that was going on around him going into the bye week, and then he does this. So he's pretty much droppable. I mean, he's going to be an inconsistent rookie quarterback who has a very tough second half of the schedule this year. So it's a tough look in this game. I mean, it was the Commanders. He should have put on a better performance than he did. DeAndre Swift is emerging a lot. He's the guy I want in the Bears offense if I had to pick one guy. I want DeAndre Swift. He's a great player. He catches the ball in the backfield. He looks explosive as of right now. You got Keenan Allen, Odunze, DJ Moore fighting for targets in a game that was very tough for our guy Caleb Williams to get going. None of them did absolutely anything, and it's very concerning because, like I said, this was supposed to be a good matchup, and later in the season, maybe the game script, they'll have to throw the ball more against these better teams, but they play a lot of good defenses coming up. So probably going to look better than this, but, man, this is ugly, and Caleb Williams just looked horrible. He looked like a rookie quarterback, and if he's gonna look like a rookie quarterback, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Odunze, none of them are playable. Cole Kmet, not playable. DeAndre Swift is the only playable guy in this offense, fantasy-wise. Ugly game for the Bears. And then even though they're about to win because their defense is good enough to keep them in games and win them some games, they're about to win. The defense pulls off one of the biggest L's in all of football history. Going over the Commanders side, they win this game on a Hail Mary. Jaden Daniels, Hail Mary. Jaden Daniels coming into this game off of a pretty brutal rib injury. Plays the game and has, one touchdown pass off a Hail Mary, a bunch of yards, a lot of them coming on that end of game 50-yard Hail Mary pass. Brian Robinson struggles terribly in this game. They could not get the run game going because the Bears are a good defense. Not a whole lot going on in the receiving game besides yards. So, I mean, when I say that, it's more just they struggled to score touchdowns, as you could see by the score, but Terry McLaurin has a good game, and then you see some of these other receivers and tight ends get into the mix as well, but the Bears defense did a good job of bending but not breaking. So until the end of the game where you have a Bears defender taunting the crowd as the play goes on, halfway through the play, he turns around, he's like, oh, these wide receivers are already near the end zone. I should probably pay attention. Runs in to tip the ball into the pile, leaving his guy just wide open in the middle of the end zone, and then tips the ball up into the air for, I believe it was Noah Brown, to just literally drops into his hands for a touchdown and loses them the game. It's like, what are you doing? Now, as a Bears fan, like if I'm a Bears fan, which I'm not, if I'm a Bears fan, and even if I'm not a Bears fan and I'm just looking on the outside, I want that dude cut. From what I've heard, the cornerback or the safety that was messing around with the crowd and cost them the game. What I've heard is he's actually a good player. Now, not a good enough player, at least yet, that like anyone actually knows about him besides Chicago fans. That is one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen, and it costs you a huge game. Does it end your season, Chicago fans? No. It's a tough loss against a good team at the end of the day. You're fine. But, man, like, I'm a Broncos fan. Raheem Moore against the Ravens in 2012, was it? Season? 2013. Yeah, I think it was 2012 season. It might have been the first year we had Peyton Manning and we played the Ravens at home in the playoffs, and we have the game in hand, and Raheem Moore just does like one of the most embarrassing safety plays of all time, and the ball just flutters over his head, and they take it to the house and ultimately cost us a game pretty much. It's like that guy got made fun of for years to come after that, and is still a joke, is still a play that we talk about in Denver. This was on that level. Like, this is something that I will never forget. Probably, I'm not even a Chicago fan, and I will never forget what this guy did, taunting the crowd, and then, like, literally so long into the play. Like, watching the video, you're just like, dude, turn around. The play started. Like, why are you still looking? The players are behind you. They're running towards you. Stop looking at the crowd. Like, turn around. And you're just like, he just never turns around until it's literally like the players are at like in the 20-yard line. Like, they're close to the end zone. And then he turns around and pays attention to the play. And then he runs over there recklessly thinking he's going to like do something cool after he's just taunted the crowd and like make the play to bat the ball down. Just jumps into the pile, losing his man, and then it tips the ball up and loses them the game. Like, that is so embarrassing. Like I said, I'm so angry if I'm a Bears fan. I'm angry for you as not a Bears fan right now. And I want that dude off my team and cut. Like, there's got to be some sort of consequence. I've seen things about it this week, like he's apologized to his teammates and stuff, and like it admitted that it was a bad look. Is like there really going to be no repercussions as like a coach? Like I would sit him for the rest of the season regardless of like if you need him or not. Like that is ridiculous. So shout out to the Commanders and Jane Daniels for pulling that off. But man, I think it says more about that play and that player on the Bears than it does like how awesome that play was for the Commanders. Like obviously a play that you won't forget as a Commanders fan either. Like it's awesome. But are you kidding me? Like, and maybe he was paying, maybe we look at it too as like he could have been paying attention, that the DB for the Bears, he could have been paying attention and the same thing could have happened technically. But the fact that he wasn't and it did is just really, really bad. So ultimately, crazy way to end a game, especially a game like as good as it was between that had the hype of the first and second overall picks quarterbacking their teams. I'm glad Jaden Daniels played because he is, a very good player. Even coming with the injury, Jaden Daniels still has 8 carries for 52 yards. If he was healthy, I think they would have won easier, like much more easy. I just think he didn't look quite 100%. Caleb Williams, man, like I think just a really tough game for the Bears overall. We just got done ranting about the DB and the Hail Mary situation, but Caleb Williams, really, dude, like what are you doing in this game? The Commanders' defense is not that good. You had a horrible game, dude. I don't think Caleb Williams is bad. He could bounce back this next week. I do think the second half of the schedule for the Bears is tough. I think it could go downhill if you guys don't play your cards right here. You could go downhill and you could end up missing the playoffs if you're not careful. This is just a sign of that. And you would have loved for Caleb Williams to come off his bye week and look a little better than he did, but man, he did not, and he looked horrible. Maybe it was just rust. I don't know. It's hard to tell with rookie quarterbacks always. We'll see what happens and if he bounces back. Crazy game, though, ultimately, and terrible loss for the Bears. All right. The Sunday night game, this is a game that we don't have to talk about much. The score was a lot close. Like, it was a lot closer score-wise than it was actually in the game. The 49ers looked it looked early like they didn't look very good. Brock Purdy struggled a little bit, missed some guys. But then they settled in a little bit, and the Cowboys just kind of gave them stuff, and the Cowboys just didn't play that good. And the running game got going. Jordan Mason went down early, but then they bring in any running back in any timeline ever, and they're going to do good in this offense. Isaac Guerrero, what is it? Guerrero? I don't even know how to pronounce it. Went in there and had a great game against a really bad Cowboys defense. Brock Purdy had a bunch of rushing yards in this game. He looked like a Bo Nix kind of player. He does fine in the passing game. You see George Kittle go off in this game. Pretty much that's all it took to beat the Cowboys because the Cowboys just look horrible. And it's mostly their defense, but the offense is just like mediocre because they don't have enough weapons and playmakers outside of CD, which we'll talk about in a second. And then their defense just is so bad that they just give up points and the offense can't keep up. So almost like an easy win for the 49ers. They didn't look perfect, but, I mean, they're dealing with injuries as well. So, I mean, Debo had a decent game too, but then they're trying to figure out if, like, Ricky Pearsall can take a step up in the passing game. They were waiting for Jahan Jennings to get back in there. They're going to be okay. They're going to be a playoff team. I'm okay if they make a run because I like that team. They're just dealt with a lot of injuries. They need Christian McCaffrey to hopefully get back with Jordan Mason struggling right now with injuries and then see what happens in the playoffs. Does get sketchy at times, though. But fantasy-wise, I mean, I forgot to talk about in the Bears and Commanders game because I was so locked into talking about the Hail Mary. But fantasy-wise, I mean, you really want to keep an eye on Isaac Guerrero. I'm butchering his name, but keep an eye on him. If Jordan Mason's out, you do expect Christian McCaffrey to play within the next couple weeks. I mean, he's got to be coming back soon. Brock Purdy, playable for sure. Especially if he's going to rush the ball, he's going to be a good play. Debo, little bit of a down week, maybe some rust after being sick. I don't know. They just let George Kittle go off, and they took advantage of that. Keep an eye on Ricky Purcell. But then again, when Jahan Jennings gets back, all of a sudden I think he's going to be taking over that wide receiver 2 role. So don't get too excited. For the Cowboys, like I said, terrible game. Rico Dowdle, which is a guy that I really like in fantasy, as you all know. He got ruled out of the game at the very beginning of the game because of an illness, like a last-minute illness. So I think that really hurt them because Zeke and Dalvin Cook are not going to get it done for you. Absolutely not. You see Zeke fall in the end zone, my goodness, 10 for 34. That's about as good as Zeke's ever going to do. They don't have a running game. And even with Dowdle, it hasn't ever looked good, but at least Dowdle's shown some signs of life and some explosiveness. And when they lost him, I think their running game just was dead. So what happened is they just got to shut down their one and only pass catcher, which is CeeDee Lamb. And so through the first half, it was not a lot going on. I will say in the second half, 49ers started to gain that lead, and then they started to play soft defense, and then CeeDee Lamb just went crazy. By far his best fantasy game of the year. He looked really good. CeeDee Lamb always looks good. It's just a matter of Dak and the defense and the game script is going to work out for him to put up some points. And in this one, he did. He got in the end zone twice, a bunch of targets, a bunch of receptions. This is why I drafted CeeDee Lamb high. I expect to see more of this throughout the rest of the season because there's a lot of good matchups. It is a little concerning, though, because the rest of the team offensively, there's just nothing there. So teams can really just double, triple team CeeDee Lamb and shut him down. And then what? You got Jalen Tolbert and Turpin. They're gonna beat you? No, I don't think so. So it is slightly concerning. But, I mean, man, he just put up 40 points in fantasy off of that stat line. Like, CeeDee Lamb is him. And I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. Regardless of how teams are playing or what you're doing, if you want to have any sort of excitement as a Cowboys offense and a Cowboys fan whatsoever, Dak should just be throwing the ball to CeeDee every single play. CeeDee Lamb is that good. So, Jake Ferguson, I'll talk about for a second. The tight end here is a guy that, he gets targets and he's in what should be a good offense and stuff. We're still waiting for Jake Ferguson, big game. I don't think he's gotten to the end zone once this year. So we'll see what happens with Jake Ferguson rest of the season. He's a guy that I start in some of my fantasy leagues. Otherwise, Jalen Tolbert and Turpin, I'm out on them. They're just not good enough to be viable starters in fantasy. So bad loss for the Cowboys. Like I said, it was a worse loss than the score says. They get some better matchups coming up in the next half of the season. We'll see if they can rattle off some wins. Rico Dowdle may help them, so they have some sense of a run game. Really ugly, though, for the Cowboys. I mean, they obviously can get a little bit more healthy within the next few weeks, maybe get some defensive pieces back, but even before the injuries started to happen, their defense wasn't very good. So it doesn't look good for the Cowboys. A lot of season to go. Easier matchups ahead. I'm nervous if I'm a Cowboys fan, though. My goodness. And the 49ers just ultimately needed to win that game. So, good win for them. All right. This is such a long video, I think. I'm going to try to go through this Monday night game somewhat quickly. Giants lose to the Steelers. Did we really think the Giants had a chance to beat the Steelers? I'm going to go through the Giants really fast. They're a bad team with a horrible quarterback. Fantasy-wise, I'll give their defense some props. Their defense is decent. Fantasy-wise, though, the only guys that have a chance to do anything just based off of how most of the game scripts are going to be for the Giants and the talent, I guess, are Wan'Dale Robinson and Malik Nabers, and that's what we saw in this one. The Giants are so bad offensively because of their quarterback. You just have to rely on target share, and game scripts. So Malik Nabers and Wan'Dale Robinson are going to be those two guys. Tyrone Tracy Jr., who's a guy I really, really like, he looked phenomenal in this game. They finally started giving him the touches. He's taken over the backfield, but then right as we all get excited about Tyrone Tracy Jr., he gets a concussion. So he's probably going to miss a week. He's going to come back probably a little rusty. It's going to take him a couple more weeks. Maybe he's like a league winner kind of guy if they get some good matchups coming up, which I think they're supposed to be maybe getting some good matchups, but He is so much better than Devin Singletary. Even when Singletary was in there, Singletary just looked like checked out half the time and like seemed like he didn't know what he was doing half the time. He's just not good. So they need to get Tyrone Tracy back, maybe put on some wins, and maybe get him going in some games, and maybe they'll get some wins. Even so, I'd be shocked if they win more than 5 games. So bad team, bad offense. Their defense could keep them in games like they did in this one. If they're not going to have Tyrone Tracy and they have Daniel Jones as their quarterback, there's not a lot of chance for them to do good, though. Steelers' defense is so good, so, I mean, they're playing a not very good offense. You expected to be a tough game for the Giants to score points. Wasn't horrible because of Tyrone Tracy, but as we saw at the end of the game, the Giants have a chance to tie it, and then the Steelers just are like, no, TJ Watt, let me just take this from you, Daniel Jones, and the game's over. You're bad, dude. Yeah. TJ Watt's a monster. Offensively, I want to talk about the Steelers for a second, obviously, with Russell Wilson. George Pickens is very good fantasy play with Russell Wilson in there. So, shout out to George Pickens, people. He looks really freaking explosive and really good. So, he's definitely playable in every league. He's like a high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1. If Russell Wilson continues to look good, then he's going to be maybe a league winner as well. I will say when it comes to Russell Wilson, as you know, Broncos fan, I have a lot to say about Russell Wilson, a lot of thoughts on Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson looks better. He looks way better than he did in Denver. I think he's playing in a system and around players that he's more comfortable with and maybe are just overall better than the Broncos were the last 2 years to him. Excuse me. We need to temper expectations a little bit. Like the Russell Wilson hype, it needs to chill out a little bit. He beat the Giants and he beat the. I know this, it's just slipping my mind right now. Whoever they beat last week. I know it wasn't a very good team. He looked good, but it wasn't a very good team the week before his first start. It's going to annoy me that I can't remember it. However, I actually can't remember it, and I don't really want to look it up as we're almost done with this video. But we need to temper expectations. If they get a couple tougher matchups, maybe some in-division matchups coming up, I could imagine Russell Wilson maybe getting on some of the Steelers fans' nerves. He almost did in this one. He had a horrible fumble late in the game that gave the Giants a chance, and the defense for the Steelers bailed him out. But could you imagine if you guys lost the game because the Giants went and took that ball and scored and then took it to overtime and you guys lost? Imagine that. That was stuff that was happening in Denver all constantly when Russell Wilson was there. So we need to temper expectations a little bit. I do think it is a perfect fit for Russ. He's on a good team with an incredible defense. You guys have a semblance of a rushing game, decent offensive line, and you guys got George Pickens essentially and some tight ends that are viable. So what does it remind you of? It reminds me of, reminds me of when he was with the Seahawks. That's what the Steelers situation is right now. You guys got a good coach. Seahawks had a good coach. It's a perfect fit for Russell Wilson. So am I sitting here telling you temper expectations? You guys probably are going to go on a losing streak and miss the playoffs. No, Steelers are going to make the playoffs, guys. I mean, they're still a good team overall, so I'm not worried about them making it whatsoever. By the way, before we do outro, if you guys haven't noticed, the screen may have freezed or be frozen now all of a sudden. My phone did just, at the last minute there, shut off or do something weird. So I'm trying to do a voiceover. We'll see how it turns out here. But I pretty much just wanted to finish that quick thought there. Steelers are still a good team. Not worried about them making playoffs. Just temper expectations on Russ. You got to consistently see it in the playoffs for you to be truly excited about it. He's still an older quarterback, falling off a little bit. So we've seen some good things from him, no doubt, the last couple weeks. Don't want to diminish the Steelers' entire life hopes here. Still going to make the playoffs because your coach we have to all realize that Russ isn't really that good, especially anymore. He needs to be carried by a good team and a good coaching staff, at least to a certain extent. He's not going to carry your team. He's just not that player. So let me end this here. Very long video. If you guys stuck with me to the entire way through, first of all, shout out to you. I really appreciate it. I try to put a little bit of time and energy into these for sure. So I appreciate you listening to the whole thing. If you liked it, please like the video. If you want to see more, subscribe to the channel. I'll keep getting stuff out for sure, sports-wise, especially throughout the rest of the NFL season. Also, please feel free to leave fantasy football questions and comments about start sits or whatnot in the comments, and I'll get right back to you. That's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your week. We'll see what happens in week 9. Looking forward to it. Peace out.